8-bit enough? Yes. All right. Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm humbled to be in this room. University was never my thing, and after hearing, all of this story, I'm kind of jealous. I didn't have that type of background or, a professor in my life. I'm more of a, let's say, amateur or self-made when it comes to engineering. But I very much admire the real ones, those that actually, study to achieve something. I'm more, in a different realm. So luckily, never had to invent or resolve, protocol challenges. My life is just about observing other people's work, essentially. So luckily, much less complex, but not less fun. So my name is Lorenzo Mangani, and I'm one of the co-founders at QuickZip or QXIP. We had kind of the, mythical type of problem. Our, original name, our original intent was all about zip, and we wanted to be quick, so QuickZip. But then, we spelled it QXIP, so people never got it. So we are QXIP. That's our story. We're essentially a research and development company. Our passion has always been and still is open source. So the dream was to just make open source. That never happened because you can't just do open source. Life doesn't work that way apparently, unless you have, of course, big purposes and big sponsors. But we're not that type of thing. We're just a small company. We're headquartered in Amsterdam. Everything started with Alexander Dubovnikov and I. Well, Alexander really is the one that came up with the first concept of Homer, which is our longest running project. I think, I lost count. I think we must have been doing it for at least 14, 15 years straight as a, let's say, full-time activity. But, we start as an open source shop that turns slightly commercial to keep itself alive and independent. So we didn't want to be owned by somebody. We didn't want to have investors. I really didn't want to wake up in the morning with somebody telling me what to do, what to work on. So we decided to just, come up with our own method that we call Robinhood, which is taking money from large companies that have large problems and have to solve them, and then using that money to do what we actually want, which is open source. So it's kind of a, self-balancing little monster with many legs, but it walks, and it's been walking for a long time. We're quite happy with the way it works. Not something that definitely not for everyone. You got to be a little crazy to do it this way, and your ambitions have to be, I'm not going to say modest, but realistic. We know that, how big we can get, how big we shouldn't get, and all of that stuff. So we really want to do what we do. And our focus has always been, well, first it was monitoring. Now we call it observability because it's cooler, but it's still monitoring after all, right? So our job is just to grab a bunch of information from a bunch of places and try to make it easier for people to go through it. Doesn't matter what it is. Our beginnings, of course, are with zip. So zip took us very far, and Homer still, I think, is quite, the project. A lot of people use it and find it valuable. But then WebRTC came, and it changed everything. So today I'm going to try to tell you a little bit how we faced, let's say, the new generation of projects. So how we go from the good old simple zip and VoIP monitoring, which is quite frankly a lot simpler than WebRTC in terms of complexity, not protocol, and how we go at it. First, a few words, of course, about Janus and Mythico, which to me are family. So there's many projects, and we interacted with many projects, but with Mythico in particular, I think it's about love more than anything else, and the respect that I have for Lorenzo and the entire Mythico team is infinite. It's an inspiration, right? I wouldn't have anything to do if somebody wasn't, creating new platforms, new ways, new protocols, and new problems, quite frankly. So the point of all, our cooperation, everything is just to bring you something. You as, our open source audience, which is the most important. Then there's, there's companies, there's businesses and stuff, but the roots are, in our will to give people something good. Now, all of you, of course, are fond and knowledgeable about Janus. We're going to hear a lot of talks today about ways to use it for, number of purposes. It can be simple, it can be complex. And what I discovered working with you guys is that Janus can really power big things. Bigger than I could imagine myself. You don't know until you see somebody do something. You don't even know if it's possible, right? It's all theory until somebody actually makes something gigantic and creates a gigantic problem. And without, going into too many details as of who or where, but this partnership gave us a chance to work on some really, really large-scale projects where there's a lot of things going on, and there's a lot of people using these services. We're talking like hundreds of millions of people. So really, really big things. And that's when, problems begin. When you have a small system or, reasonably small, you can do a bunch of things. You can monitor pretty much whatever you want. But the bigger it goes, the bigger it scales, the more everything multiplies. And then you have to choose what really matters to you, right? Some people it's going to be, the infrastructure. For us, it's going to be the user. It kind of changes. But what I've noticed is that the bigger it gets, the more it becomes about the user experience, whatever that matters. It's different for every service, right? For some, it's simply, the quality of streaming. For others, is a bunch of little components related to it, especially when WebRTC just powers maybe a subset of something, right? Imagine a big platform where real-time communication is just a piece of it, and it has to be orchestrated with everything else. It has to be synchronized with a bunch of other things going on. It's just not a web chat or a video call. It's WebRTC and media attached to something that's very, very much real-time and latency related. So everything has to be stitched together, has to work together. And what do you care about when that happens? We don't know. So a step back, WebRTC has seen many solutions over the years that were, created to solve the problem. But in my opinion, none of them did. All of those were tailored for, either very specific use cases and produce something that you have to be happy with, right? So here's a platform, you plug it in, produces some dashboard, some data, take it, trust it, use it, and that's it, which is the opposite of what I'm all about. My idea is about choice. So I think people should be able to, get the data, use standards, and turn it into what they need. It shouldn't be prepackaged, right? Especially when you run something complex, you just need the ability to say, okay, I'm interested in this piece, this is key for me, and that's all I need. I don't need to bloat it with, a mega ecosystem of integration technologies, plugins, or whatever, just to get to what I want, which is to measure something that's important to my business. So instead of doing that, well, we did that at the beginning. So our first attempt was with Hummer. So we said, okay, we already have a cool, VoIP monitoring platform. Let's just extend it to catch these new protocols, and everything's going to be great. Not at all. That wasn't at all the solution, but it helped us, understand and take a first step in the right direction, which, in my opinion, this is still what I believe, is all about using standard formats and giving people tools, not microwave meals, giving them ingredients and recipes so they can cook it. It doesn't matter if they want to make a toast or a dinner for 1 million people. You give them the recipe, you give them the instructions, not the finished project. So this is not about selling a solution that you can use. Hey, take the solution, give me the money, and you're done. Not at all. It's here's a bunch of technology. If you know what to do with it, great. If you need help, sponsor us and we'll help you get there. So to do this, of course, with Janus, we used the Janus events. How many of you use Janus events, or know what they are on a daily basis? Mythical excluded. Hands down. Real hands? 1, 2, 3, few. Not many. Right? So what are Janus events? So the whole time that things are happening, Janus is telling you about those things with the events that it emits. These events go into great detail from the very first packet that comes into the platform through all of its evolution. It kind of forks. It's a huge tree that actually describes what Janus is doing inside, or Januses, we should say, because this most typically applies to a battery of services that are running at the same time. And those are JSON objects, essentially. If you, and I believe you all will have seen Lorenzo's presentation about Janus events, or maybe you read the blog post on the Mythical website and so on and so forth, you already know that those are, how can we say, very regional. Is that a fair way to say it? Right, so they picture what's inside of Janus, but they, let's say, are not super standardized. They're very dynamic because Janus is very dynamic inside. So, those events just tell you the truth. But if you take them all and you try to, ingest them as they are, you end up with a lot of complexity, which is really what we wanted to multiply. So what we came up with is JAWS, which is our Janus WebSocket Shark. It's just a nickname for it, but it's basically a receiver for Janus events. So you can have 1, 10, 100, 1,000 Janus services stream events into JAWS, which is essentially a gateway. What JAWS does is it takes all of these events and with a very, very thin and simple logic, it splits them into standards. So some of those logs, well, all of those events can be turned into logs that you can search. So for some of those, that's perfect. It's just a bunch of objects. You want to search through them to find an ID, a name, a participant, a room, something that you can grep for. And then it becomes about metrics and traces. So those are pillars of observability. And the way we implemented it is with standards. So we didn't invent our own protocol or whatever. We chose open telemetry. Well, actually, we look at the market and we see, to see what are people using to solve this problem in other realms. When they observe a web service, when they observe something that doesn't have anything to do with real-time communications, but it sits around them, website infrastructure, whether it's Kubernetes or just networks and whatever. And open telemetry is the way to do it. It's what the industry picked as the lingua franca of exchanging observability data. So that's what we went for. So JAWS essentially takes the Janus events, turns them into standard observability, and this means that you can send them anywhere. So you can take one of thousands of services that are open telemetry compatible, and those things are going to be ingested with logic, meaning that they end up somewhere where you can actually make use of them right away to build a dashboard, to search for service or whatever it is. This is how they look inside. I suggest that, of course, you feed this from the source. So this is just a couple of extracts from Lorenzo #1's content. But as you can see, we have categories: session-related, handle-related, protocol-related, media events, and so on and so forth. Events originating from plugins. This is super important. One of you is going to write some type of plugin next month, next week, next year, whatever, and inside of it, there's going to be something new that we didn't think of. And with the Janus events, you don't have to do it. You can just, feed something to the same mix. If you do the job right, this something is going to correlate with the previous step, right? So your plugin is going to come after something, and that something is going to come after something else, right? So this allows us to sort of picture the entire chain, how something evolves inside of Janus and how it works, right? So from, is the session established right? Where does it come? What issues does it have at the beginning? When it gets connected, the media starts flowing. Is it media good, bad? Does it change? Does it update? There's a bunch of things that can happen that we're not going to define here. We just need to trace them, give them to you, and give you the ability to use it. So this is more or less how everything translates. So session-related events can be logs, can be traces, can be metrics, depending on what you want, and so on and so forth with all the rest. I'm going to drink. Right. So when we have all these events turn into standards, it means that we can start ingesting them somewhere. And this is where, of course, we're also open source makers. So we could have used Prometheus, we could have used Loki, we could have used a bunch of the other things that you can use, but just because it's fun, we made our own. So we created our stack that's called qryn. It took, let's say, 4 solid years of working hard from the bottom up because we didn't want to use anybody else's technology, especially we didn't want to use technologies owned by US companies, Chinese companies, or, we just wanted to make a nice, free, open source stack made in Europe, designed for, our standards, which are very much about, let's say, not intercepting people and not doing anything that's not necessary, right? And this is what we ended up with. So we have a platform that can basically ingest all of these standards. It's a hot swap replacement for Prometheus, for Loki, for Tempo, and a bunch of other things all at once. So we just wanted one thing that you could use for all of those purposes and that you can escape from. So if you take this platform and there's something wrong with it, without changing protocols, without touching Janus, without doing anything, you can go to one of the larger projects. So if you think ours is too tiny, doesn't scale, great, use Prometheus. It's the same protocols, nothing happens. You just keep going. So it's hot swappable. It doesn't lock you in. There's no vendor profile or anything else that would make you stick with us. So if you like it, great. And if you need something bigger, you can. This is how it looks. So it's everything, or we use Grafana, I would say, nowadays for the majority of things. It's not mandatory, but it's just something that works and a lot of people know and use. So when you have engineers and DevOps having to deal with things like this, it's good if they can use something that they're familiar with rather than, hey, here's a new web interface, here's a new way that you have to use. This way you can take basically WebRTC and just throw it in the middle of your infrastructure monitoring. You're going to see how this Janus is doing just next to how your service is doing, network is doing, and whatever. It's all in one picture. So let's see a little bit of things that we can do with this. When it comes to logs or to these events, this is how they actually will look inside of the platform. They come as JSON objects, they get parsed, and things that, let's say, are relevant to correlation or searching get indexed. So you can see here we have media ID, session ID, emitter names, the type of event, timestamp, and whatever. It's kind of the entry level, right? This is how you find something in the the needle in a haystack that you want to start from, whether it's a user, it could be a complaint, it could be a server, maybe there's a Janus instance that's flapping a lot and you want to see what it's doing. You can just get into it from any angle, and you can extract data from this stuff. So this is one example where we just go through all of the Janus events that contain an RTT value, and we extract it and we project it over time. So without ever collecting any metrics about anything, we just have a bunch of these objects and we just say, take all of those belonging to a specific instance, extract a specific value, project it over time for me, just like that. And you can change your mind at any point. So this data is not pre-generated, right? So if you say, I shouldn't partition by 10 seconds. I need a bigger resolution, or I should look at it by the hour instead of by the minute. You can change your mind as you go, and so can your dashboards and your engineers. So it just makes it flexible to chase things. We can look at the distribution of these events over time super easily without querying anything. So show me everything that a specific Janus instance has been producing over time, and how many of those things were, ICE exchanges, plugin generated, and whatever. You can see it super easily. And then you can explore them. This is super important, using a standard language. So using PromQL, which I would say is something that maybe 90% of DevOps would already use. So you can hire a guy that has never seen WebRTC before, and within 10, 15 minutes, you can be already building, dashboard systems and alerts about what's inside of the box without necessarily having to deal with the complexity, right? What is a Janus event? That guy is not going to care. He just needs to care about, I don't know, RTT or latency, right? So we can also generate traces. This is a little more complex, but as I was telling you, the events are related to each other. So you can see down there in that little timeline, you can see how, a handle generates a handle attached, there's an event and whatever else, then there's a heist exchange, and then there's a media report and whatever. They all come in sequence, and you can actually see how long they take. So if, let's say, you upgrade Janus, or maybe you make a plugin and you see one of those numbers change, then you know there's something wrong in there, right? So maybe a lookup is taking too long, or something goes wrong, your plugin is broken, whatever it be, you would immediately see it. So how this changes, yesterday a user took 0 seconds to make an exchange, and today they take 1 microsecond more. You would see it. This is stuff that's otherwise completely invisible. You wouldn't know. You can profile your code as well. So on one side, we're taking Janus events. On the other one, you're writing a client, most likely, right? You have some software that's interacting with Janus. Instrument it, right? So now you can go, and with just a few lines of code, you can instrument your application to say, hey, this is interesting. This is something that you wouldn't be able to tell from the Janus side or maybe from the middle. Only my application knows how long it took for a specific function to run. Trace it. Send into the stack. You can use, there's a bunch of SDKs, and again, we're all about compatibility. So none of these SDKs, none of these things comes from us. You don't have to trust me with these things. They all come from mega companies, and they're used by millions of people, and they have hundreds of thousands of contributors. So we're compatible with open source that has an incredible footprint, right? You can just use it, and now magically it's compatible with Janus and WebRTC out of the box. You can extend this. So now we're looking at Janus. We can look at the application. We can also look at the browser. There's a bunch of extensions that you can write or use where you can just latch anything else. So in this case, we can install extensions in the browser and then have the browser send all of its data into the same mix. So in the same place where you're connecting Janus events, server logs, Kubernetes metrics, and whatever, now you can have also some browser stats. And these browser stats are going to, of course, have correlation to the session, because that client is running in Janus. Janus has an identifier. You're already collecting on the other side. So if something arrives from a browser, now you can tell where it belongs. It's just not data that's just flowing around, but now you can know. So you have the inbound audio, video, and whatever else directly from that client. So you can kind of compare it, right? Was this guy having the same experience as my events are telling, or maybe it doesn't? You can instrument your applications with a few lines of code. So here you can see the OpenTelemetry API tracer. You just import into your application and run it. All it takes is really these few lines of code. You start a span, right? When a function starts, you start tracing it, and when you finish it, you stop. And now magically, in the same backend, you also have details about the inside of your code. You can use it for synthetic testing. There's a bunch of applications that were designed for, let's say the API world that are already OpenTelemetry compatible, and a bunch of them, quite frankly, can be used out of the box with WebRTC services until the media part comes, of course. So, triggering calls, mechanisms, connections, and whatever else is super, super easy, and it can basically be done with no cost. So you can start, observing everything. LLMs, I think you're going to be hearing about this quite a lot, right? So now we know what Janus is doing. Now we know what your application is doing, what the browser is doing. What about the LLMs that all of this is using? Are they introducing latency, complexity, problems, and whatever? Trace it the same way. So qryn, because it's standard, already comes compatible with monitoring anything from OpenAI things and whatever else, which is, by being standard, we're automatically compatible with anything that people come up with in this realm. And this is something that, is going to be super, super key. So we're ready for the next set of problems as well. They're going to be coming from, adding this new layer, which, yes, it's fast, but when it comes to real-time communication, fast is never fast enough, right? So we're going to be able to track how this fits into the puzzle, and so much more. All of the stuff that I'm talking about, and probably dozens more interesting things only for a few people, you can find them on the qryn blog. So on the qryn blog, I'm trying to replace just plain documentation with real life examples. How do you do A, B, C, D, E? There's a bunch of things in there. Of course, if you don't find yours, let me know, and I'm going to write it out. But it's a collection of ways to use this new stack or any other stack for our WebRTC related needs. So just to make us citizens of the same planet where everybody else has been living for the last few years, making everything standard and fun. So lots to do with Janus, but really not too specific. So this applies to pretty much anything. It applies to technology that you can write yourself or that comes from other vendors. The point is just to put it all together and make it easy to observe it, to understand what it's doing. The same stuff is inside Homer 10, so it's all about 10 this year. The platform is now powered by the same technology that I just described. So we turned the stack from a very VoIP and SIP-centric one into one that can literally just ingest anything. We can take things coming from the network, packets that we sniff passively, packets that we obtain from our embedded agents, which are already in Kamailio, in FreeSwitch, in Asterisk, and all of those things that might be connected to your WebRTC logic. From a protocol perspective, they can all be ingested. And now you can also plug things from every layer of your infrastructure. So the network is sniffed passively, your application can be instrumented, the service speaks a protocol that we support, the stack, Kubernetes, and whatever can be all auto-monitored. So there's things really that just you enable one line in Docker, in everything else that you can use. All of these things, oops. Luckily it was closed. All of these things are natively supported. How? By virtue of just choosing and obsessing on standard protocols. And yeah, that's the introduction. I mean, it just, it's an umbrella because these things is literally meant to be solving 1,000 problems. And but it all begins with Janus for us. So if it wasn't for all of these events and all of that mess that we couldn't decode, we would never started this journey, which is actually turning out to be quite fruitful and fun. The screen is getting worse, but hopefully didn't cover anything useful. And that's all I had for you today. If you have any questions or whatever, you can ask them now, or you can catch me around the rooms and whatever, and find what's missing, because that's what we want to develop. And thank you so much.
Any questions for Lorenzo?
Where's the food?
Where's the food? Yeah, so if, yeah, we're going for a little break right now.